Hello and welcome, friends, to our Secular Buddhist Essentials program. My name is Venerable Tarpa. Before we begin, let's take a moment to appreciate our beautiful community gathered here today. We have a lovely group of people. Today, I feel fortunate to sit as a member of this kind community in the safety and security of like-minded friends, sharing this present moment with others dedicated to the cultivation of goodness. Today, I'm grateful for the direction and support that this community provides, a community worthy of my time and commitment, a community where my efforts have meaning, purpose, and are appreciated. Today, I'm thankful for this community of awakening, a place to gain the knowledge and skills to improve my life, a family, a home, and a sanctuary for all of us seeking refuge from the storm. And boy, I feel that. And as conscientious practitioners, which we all are, we must recognize our responsibility to the world, to strive to live skillfully while helping others to do the same, to strive to live in balance and harmony with nature and others, to strive to gain mastery over our minds and embody our true benevolent nature, to expand our hearts and minds, transcending our shared human limitations, to not intentionally harm sentient life or our planet, and to maturely accept and embrace the reality of our situation while striving to improve it. Oh, I like that prayer. Welcome, 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 everybody. Glad you made it back. So, I think everybody knows this is a new program we've been doing, Secular Buddhist Essentials, and it's kind of weird. We're a weird group. We're kind of writing the book as we're doing live teachings, and let alone is it a lot of fun. But better than that, we get a lot of help from our friends, from the Sangha, and the questions you ask, the comments you make, a lot of them go right into the text. So we're going to be doing this program for a while, and then at the end of it, we're hoping to produce a really cool text for the secular world, which will be called Secular Buddhist Essentials. And so we're still on the intro, or we're just finishing the introduction section of the text. So there's three parts in the text. The beginning is introduction and adaptation. And then the second part is what the Buddha taught, more of the teachings of philosophy. The third part is how to practice. So it's going to be really exciting to do all that. So we'll slowly move through all that material. But we're still in the introduction part right now. So the presentation today is quite a bit shorter, which means we can have a whole lot more fun. We can, like before, I'll read our text of it because we don't have a text to give everybody right away. And then we'll open up the floor to comments. And this is a fascinating topic in Buddhism, and it is the Buddhist worldview. So Buddhism, like other Indian religions, inherits an ancient worldview that long predates them. While similar in many respects, each tradition adapts this cosmology to suit its own needs. The traditional Buddhist worldview presents our universe as existing in a constant cycle of expansion and contraction, of formation, abiding, destruction, and vacuity. A universe that possesses infinite amounts of world systems that are inhabited by infinite amounts of sentient life. A universe that extends horizontally in its arrangement of stars and planets, as well as vertically in ascending levels or realms of existence, beginning with lower hell realms through ghost realms, animal realms, human realms, titan realms, and the highest of heaven realms. Unlike most religions, the Buddhist worldview doesn't posit a universe locked in battle between good and evil. Instead, it asserts a natural universe operating within natural universal properties. Buddhism, being non-theistic, holds no belief in a creator God. or a conscious universe, insisting that consciousness can only exist or be produced by a mind. This means that the principles of conscious awareness, discernment, judgment, value, meaning, purpose, and function can only be known or experienced by a mind. That our universe is indifferent to the ethical strife of beings. Another unique aspect of the Buddhist worldview is that Buddhism is one of the only religions without an origination story. A story that explains the creation of our universe, the earth, or sentient life. Additionally, all traditional Buddhist schools share a belief in mystical powers, miracles, and miraculous beings. The Buddha and other superior beings are asserted to possess extraordinary powers, including clairvoyance, telepathy, seeing past and future lives, flying through the sky, and astral projection. But what's deemed most important is to gain control over the process of one's rebirth. Within Buddhism, the pursuit and cultivation of magical powers is seen as a trivial goal and a distraction from the actual spiritual aim of awakening. So that's my presentation of the traditional Buddhist view. I think I'm just going to read through this and then we'll go back. So as far as the secular Buddhist view goes, with so many outrageous claims found within the various Buddhist traditions and the absence of any subsuitable evidence, what are secular Buddhists to believe? Question mark. The Buddha himself showed little interest in addressing questions pertaining to metaphysics or cosmology, instead urging students to focus on the present task of awakening. So, in that same spirit, I also de-emphasize these topics in my own presentations and instead leave it to the student to investigate and to decide for themselves what to believe. The Buddha's aversion to metaphysical inquiry is illustrated in a famous parable of a man who shot with an arrow. Rather than accepting treatment, the man insists on knowing who shot him, what caste the shooter belonged to, and what the arrow was made of. And through this fixation on these details, he potentially risks his life while his answers still remain unanswered. So the parable implies that students should not waste their time on speculation, but instead should focus on the immediate work of awakening. The most potentially inaccuracies in Buddhism are found in its cosmology, most of which are later scriptural additions not directly taught by the Buddha. I myself think that these topics related to cosmology are probably best answered by science. And other Buddhist leaders agree with me, like the Dalai Lama. And I'd like to finish this with a little piece on the meaning of life according to Buddhism. So the meaning of life is held differently among different people and cultures. For the religious, the meaning of life can be to serve God. For many, life is merely about survival. For others, life is seen as a contest to be won. However, for Buddhists who are non-theistic, holding no belief in a creator God or conscious universe, the universe simply lacks the ability to impute meaning. In other words, only a mind can impute meaning upon life. It's ourselves, our family, friends, and our culture that decides on the meaning of our lives. According to Buddhism, at the universal level, there is no ultimate meaning to life. We exist because we exist as unique manifestations of the universe. In other words, we're free to choose for ourselves what our lives mean and how we express and experience them. However, with that said, the Buddha does assert awakening as the true purpose and consummation of life. Hey, that's my presentation. Short and sweet. What do you guys think about this? How about we back up to the traditional Buddhist worldview? Boy, that's a lot to take in, isn't it? And I left lots out. There's all kinds of really interesting things. Padma, please share.
Yeah, I just had a thought about that. A good presentation, by the way. Um, I just had a thought about something that I don't know whether it's missing or whether it's just my belief. But you spoke in the previous lesson quite a lot about clarity, which is rings true pretty much for everybody, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And but so clarity and our lives today in 2025 is very much autopilot and feels like a simulation. And I think that will probably chime with most people in secular Buddhism. I could be wrong, but I think that would chime as an important area to speak about. So I'd be interested to know where you're at with that belief of the social makeup of a simulation of
Well,
compliance.
I can sure relate to that. Yeah, life is awful weird nowadays with all the technology. Clarity isn't part of the worldview. I would say that's more of Buddhist psychology. But I'm with you. I think clarity is probably the most important quality in all of Buddhism. I often see clarity as synonymous with awakening. That enlightenment is just the highest level possible of human clarity. Thank you, Padma. Now on, please share.
Yeah, I was just wondering. I know you mentioned that Buddhism is not theistic, but maybe I'm wrong. I have an impression that some traditions still promote ideas about gods and goddesses and stuff like that. And I was wondering, is that actually true? And how do we reconcile? How do they reconcile that? I wonder.
Sure. You know, Robert Thurman, I think, was the first scholar to talk about, to label Buddhism non theistic. Because the idea is in the sutras, there is mention of the Hindu gods. Now, whether how whether they were added or appropriated is another story, but there's a story that the Buddha, upon his enlightenment, thought that Buddhism was way too difficult to teach to people. He thought nobody's going to understand this, and especially think about that this is 2 millennia ago. So, but it's said that the Hindu gods begged him to teach so there is mention of it in there, and there's just tons of mystical and magical beings in all of the sutras. So the idea is that the gods are mentioned, but according to the Buddha, uh, he looked for the God that made it all, and he could not find any such thing. So though there's gods or deities, both in Buddhism, there is no creator deity. So that's where the expression non theistic came from. But, and then, of course, I'm talking about the traditional Buddhist view, not what a lot of us would say is our secular view. And we're going to get to more of that in a minute. I can't wait to open up this can of worms. I have so many great stories. Oh, Brian, please.
Uh, can you hear me? Okay. So was
Perfectly.
all right, great. Was the Buddha non-theistic himself? Because like when he was enlightened, and I know in the Theravada view they have like the 4 stages of enlightenment, going to Arahat or whatever. And then when he talks about the rebirth, which I know you touched on, I think well, no, that was last week about karma. But so anyway, did he actually like become enlightened and then he experienced or came about those beliefs of like the stages of enlightenment and like who operates that in those stages of enlightenment. Like, I don't know. I just kind of it like most of it makes all sense, like, very down to earth. And then when you get
Okay,
into these other
let me
realms,
share. I got it. Let me share it with you.
okay.
So now it really depends on what traditions we're talking about, and we're going to get into that in a minute. The traditions, some of them have just outrageous stories of how it all works. But let's start with the kind of the most basic, the Theravada, that the Buddha again. Most of the things that the Buddha taught, I think we can safely say he came upon after his enlightenment. But the idea is, again, the Buddha claimed he couldn't find the creator of all things. So that's why there's no story of origination of things in Buddhism. According to Buddhist cosmology, all beings, there's these six realms, six desire realms, and I talked about them: hell, ghost, animal, human, titan or demigod, asura level, fighting gods, and the God realm. Some are in great realms with great pleasure and everything, but they're all still in samsara. This is kind of fascinating. The only being, even the gods are in samsara. The only being that can escape samsara is a Buddha. So Buddhas are considered the highest beings in the universe. Even the Hindu gods are trapped in samsara, according to traditional Buddhism, right? So it's quite fascinating. And then how the different traditions posit the Buddha is pretty fascinating as well. So the Theravada tend to be, we could say, the most grounded. Although, boy, do they have a lot of mystical stories, just like everybody else. But they see the Buddha as a human being, and he's an arhat. And then when we step up to the Mahayana, the Buddha is seen as a universal savior, right? Almost godlike. And he's elevated to a much higher, far above the arhats. Arhats are here, and an actual Buddha is much higher than that. And then you get into Tantric Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism, and he becomes a completely mystical being, where they assert that the Buddha actually never stepped foot on the earth. He lived and abided in his Buddha heaven, and he merely emanated in the countless world systems. And he went through what looked like the process of awakening for everybody's benefit. So in his emanation, an image of him comes to earth. He was already enlightened. It just goes through the motions to teach us all awakening. So as you can see, there's some really different views on this. And I think, of course, as secular Buddhists, we like to think he was just an incredible human being who was, man, really ahead of his time, right? Isn't it extraordinary that 2 millennia after the Buddha's passing, science, psychology, philosophy, his work still holds up? It's just extraordinary. Not all of it, but it's just amazing that anybody's work could hold up that long, right? Oh, that was long. What else you got? Any other questions? Fascinating, huh? David, please.
Sorry. I maybe picked this up wrong, Sangha, but almost the last thing you said about the meaning of life, that Buddhism holds there is no meaning to life. But then later on you said the meaning of a life is to awaken, if I recollect.
Yeah, let me help you with that. So to be specific, Buddhism doesn't believe there's an ultimate or universal meaning of life. We believe that clearly there's meaning to life. In fact, that's what human beings are. We're meaning-making machines. Everything we do, we bring meaning to. That's what conscious life does. It brings meaning to the universe. So we, Aristotle or Plato, be a man is a being in search of meaning. So that is what we do. But as far as a universal, the universe telling us, David, you were put on this planet to eat Ben and Jerry's ice cream and nothing else. There's no universal meaning. It's up to us, right? But then Buddhism talks about that the true purpose or consummation of life, he asserts as awakening. So meaning is why you're here. Purpose is what you should do with your life, according to Venerable Tarpa. That's how I see those two words.
Okay.
And
thank
so
you.
what's the ultimate purpose? Or let's not use the word ultimate. What's the purpose of our lives? Is to awaken, to become as great a beings as we can in whatever capacity. Kindest, most wonderful, most authentic. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Good question. And yeah, there's so many stories. And so the Theravada, they like to posit themselves as, we're down to earth. We're not into all this. Because the further you get, it just becomes more religious and more mystical. When we start off with the Buddhist teachings, in the EBTs, the early Buddhist teachings, then they call it the Nikaya tradition. So you have a bit of a grounded Buddhism, right? And then the Mahayana comes along and really makes it religious. I think Stephen Batchelor believes that Buddhism became religious in the first council. If some of you know, they had gatherings of practitioners after the death of the Buddha, right? So they had one right away, and Mahasakapa, I believe, was the guy, and in a sense, he kind of takes the Buddhist Sangha away from Ananda, and Batchelor asserts that he's the first guy to turn Buddhism into a religion, to kind of reify it. And then, but nevertheless, after the Buddha's death, people started having different interpretations of what he said, because that's what people do. And we end up with 18 different schools of Buddhism, none of which any of you have ever heard. It's the first 18 division. And then they have these councils to bring people together to either scold some people for not doing it right, or bringing it together to bring all the ideas together. And so Buddhism starts to become more religious and or mystical, right? And so the Mahayana becomes quite mystical, right? The Mahayana Sutras, which are written, 300 years after the Buddha's death, they're written in the Buddha's voice, like they're all sitting around. And the Buddha told me, and it's written in that language, so that's kind of discomforting for me, at least. But it becomes more religious, and then as Buddhism ages in India, it starts to merge with Hinduism, and we have the tantric tradition is born from that, and the tantric tradition becomes very mystical, as you all know, with all the deities and the story of the Buddha and Buddha heaven emanating to world systems. So Buddhism slowly grows like that, but they all the traditions are filled with wild magical stories. The Theravada is loaded with them, from the story of the Buddha, who upon taking birth from his mother's side can walk, flowers appear at his footsteps, he can recite mantras. There's a story of the Abhidharma, that the Buddha goes to heaven and teaches it to his deceased mother, and then walks down a golden staircase to teach it to humankind. The Mahayana has stories of Nagarjuna diving to the bottom of the ocean to get the Mahayana Sutras from the Naga kings. The Naga kings are snake fish people, and they're very powerful but dangerous. So, there's some great stories in Buddhism. Now, again, I say in the article, now as secular Buddhists, man, what are we supposed to believe, right? This is kind of tough. So that's our work at hand, right? Garuda, would you like to share?
Yeah, it just regards the Dalai Lama and his constantly mentioning sort of secular Buddhism and promoting it to give a wider audience, I think, and that's one of the reasons that I was attracted to it, because there was less, and as I discovered to secular Buddhism, there was less emphasis on being a religion, and it was more down to your viewpoint and more of a way of life rather than a strict religious religion. Do you
Well
think
said.
he's trying to direct it gently back to being a way of life rather than being considered to be a religion?
Well, funny you should ask that. I just wrote an article in our last newsletter called Embracing Spiritual Beauty, in which it talks about some of that and some of my views on that. Generally, for SBT, we see secular Buddhism as a spectrum. From on one side we have traditional Buddhist views, on the other side purely secular Buddhist views. But I don't believe in holding a single viewpoint. I think everyone should be open to discovering their own truth for themselves, right? Now SBT has a curriculum that's secular, and that's what we share. But as far as individual people's beliefs, I think we should leave it to them. I think all of you are capable to decide the truth for yourself. And I'm not arrogant enough to say my beliefs are right, everybody should follow what I believe. I think that's the beauty of secular Buddhism, that we're leaving behind that dogma.
Absolutely,
Right.
and that's what attracted me to it, rather than that being a strict religion where you believe this or you're not a Buddhist or things. So it
Exactly.
is. So that's, yeah, I think,
Thank you,
and I
Guru.
think that's why he's promoting it so much, to actually get more people thinking about it, and to maybe to rethink it being from a
I think
strict
so
religion.
too.
Yeah.
I think so. Thank you, Garuda. Dana?
I know that the Dalai Lama, I've read some of his stuff, and he talks about dependent origination. Is that something that the Buddha taught, or is this something that's developed since the Buddha?
It was taught by the Buddha. Some claim that it was the single greatest contribution to humanity. And so, dependent origination, without getting into it, there's kind of two aspects of it. One of them is the first that the Buddha highlights is the idea that things are built upon other things, right? That nothing just comes into being. There's a framework of things, and higher things are based upon many things. Oh, an example: a tree is based on rain and soil and the seed, and so. And then there's the idea of interrelation, that things are interrelated. But some people take that too far into monism, which is more of a Hindu belief, believing that all things are one and all things are connected. Buddhism believes in plurality, right? Though we're interconnected, we're not interconnected with everything. I'm not interconnected with a Chinese lady in China that teaches English or something like that. I'm interrelated with my environment, but not everything in my environment, right? But this is, considered one of the Buddha's greatest accomplishments or gifts to humanity. A strictly Buddhist belief. It didn't exist before the Buddha. Good answer. Good question, Dana. And good answer, Tarpa. He's on fire, folks. It's fascinating, isn't it? David.
Just to follow up to my previous question, Tarpa, I'm struggling a wee bit to see how something can have no meaning but can have a purpose. Surely meaning is some sort of
Oh,
prerequisite
again,
for something
we
to have a
never
purpose.
said no meaning. We say meaning. Every human beings bring meaning to everything. So I never said no meaning. We said no universal, no single universal meaning. A lot of us kind of believe that we're put on the earth for one duty, one thing, one, I was meant to do this. Or some people think it's a quality, like the meaning of life is to help others. But all of those things are thoughts or concepts from a mind, right? The universe doesn't have a mind. The universe, if there's no God to do that, then nothing can imply that meaning. So what we're saying, David, is that you're free to decide what life means to you and what meaning you're going to bring to it. So we think the opposite, that life is just a wash of meaning. We are in an ocean of meaning, and it's beautiful, and it's what I think we should be doing. Bring meaning to your life, bring love and joy. Is that better?
Yeah, so it's clearer. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
You know there'll be another question coming sometime about it, but that's like...
Hey, we got 25 minutes. What other wacky stuff do you guys want to talk about? When I talk about being a secular Buddhist, and I talk to my traditional Buddhist friends, and they go, "What is it? How can you think that?" When I think, we're all the same. I said, aren't there aspects in the Buddhist teachings that you simply can't take as fact? Again, like the Buddha's birth story, or there's stories that the Buddha, his miracles, the Buddha can dive in and out of the earth. He can replicate himself across the sky. He goes on and on. Walk on water. He did that before Jesus. Just an outrageous amount. Just anything you can imagine, they attribute to the Buddha's magic. So my traditional friends will say, well, yeah, there's some things that I can't take as fact. And I said, well, that's just like secular Buddhists. It's just that our list is a little longer than yours. We have a few more. A topic came up the other day, maybe a good time to talk about. A friend was saying, how do you dictate who can be a secular Buddhist or not? Where do you draw those lines? And I think I'm losing my train of thought. The idea is that, so we have all these beliefs in Buddhism. We have heavens, hells. We have mystical beings like hell beings and demons, hungry ghosts, nagas, these snake people, dakinis, which are kind of like Buddhist angels. We have all these things. So say that you believe in most of it, but you decide, I can't believe in deities. Right? That one thing, you just pick that one thing. Now, if somebody comes to SBT and says, I'm comfortable with most of it, it's just deities. I just can't follow those guys. And they want to call themselves a secular Buddhist. Who am I to argue? And maybe for someone else, they're okay with deities, but they don't like something else. I know in our Sangha, we have a lot of folks who are comfortable with the idea of rebirth, usually just a belief, not actually knowing it to be true, but they're comfortable with rebirth, but not a lot of the other things, right? So each one of us can kind of decide one-on-one which aspects we agree with. We're not like other religions where you're given a book and said, oh, here you go, Shiva. Here's your belief system. Memorize this by Tuesday. This is all the things you now believe in. That's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? So the idea is, I see secular Buddhism as just this openness for people to decide for themselves what to believe in or not to believe in. I don't think that that's my position to dictate, mostly because I don't know for sure if it is or not. Beliefs are not facts. It's not knowable, right? That's why we call them beliefs. I remember when I first got into Buddhism, funny story, I was really gung-ho. Most of it was online. There was no centers around me. And And I got to the point, I at the time I had my Christian values. I was brought up Roman Catholic when I was a boy, not a very religious family, but we went to church on Sundays. But I had those values. And I remember reaching a point where I said, oh, finally, I no longer believe in heaven and hell anymore. Buddhism has set me straight. I've finally got over that. I was so proud of myself. And then shortly thereafter, I studied more. And I go, hey, there's heaven and hell in this. What's going on? I was so disappointed. I felt let down. I worked so hard to get rid of it. And there it was. Zach's laughing. He knows it's true. There it was on the page, heaven, and let alone heaven and hell. There was 6 desire realms: an animal realm, a human realm, a jealous god realm. Oh my goodness! So, anyways, I think that's a funny story. So maybe that was the first time I became a secular Buddhist. So I really rejected that idea. That if you read the stories of the I try hard not to get myself into trouble because sometimes I'm way too honest. But for me, when I read the stories of the 6 realms, the 6 desire realms, they're really kind of comical the way they're written. It's almost like just a kid just wrote stories about these places. And the hell realms, you wouldn't believe the stories. One, there's a whole bunch of them. There's I think 8 hot and 8 cold. There's one where they stick red hot pokers through your tongue over and over. There's another one where the plants are sharp and they cut your legs when you're walking. They're just dare I use the word ludicrous. I know I'm going to get in trouble for this video. But we are talking about Buddhist cosmology, and I am a secular Buddhist. So that made me a secular Buddhist. But yet I still have some beliefs. Like rebirth doesn't sound so far from me. I don't know it's true. I have a loose belief in it currently. But yeah. Oh, let's get to some questions. Dana, please share.
I'm curious about when you were in school, the Gulak school there for all those years. How did you deal with your conflict there? What their, you know, were they willing to listen to your doubts?
Yeah, Buddhism in general always positions itself like that. We're open to everything, and you should question everything. But at the end of the day, like in debate, you're open to question. But at the end of the day, you're expected to have the right answer, which is their right answer. Yeah, I drove them a little bit crazy. I drove them a little, but they were pretty good. And I wasn't like a full-fledged secular Buddhist until I actually left the monastery. But I used to, as I've mentioned before, I had to hide all my Stephen Batchelor books in my room from the other monks, so they didn't think I was a heretic. And I was warned not to read Stephen Batchelor's books. And now I see what they mean. Look at me now. What a Tashi.
So I have more of a comment, actually, is that I've been here for what, 5 years? 5 years, maybe 4, I don't know. But I've been to all these teachings, and what I love is that you put everything out there and you go, so you decide, you know, and that I don't think anybody's ever done that. I mean,
Is there any other way to do it?
I know.
For honest people, is there any other way to do it?
Right. And
Because
it's like
none of us know.
Yeah. And it's like comparative religion class all in one, So
Yeah.
this is great. And thank you.
Oh, Patrick, please share with us.
At first, I think this was your best written. I know this is difficult. No more difficult than the other ones, but this was like this was perfect to me. I think it was great work.
I agree, Patrick.
I know you're already on board there.
It's a wonderful teaching.
My question was, following up on the person who asked you about your experience, like, do you feel like when it's not quite exactly, but I'm interested. you feel like when you were transitioning from like being in the sect that you were in to like transitioning out, that you were kind of supported on the way out? It sounds like you were, but I'm curious how you might.
No. Stephen Batchelor tells a good story that when he became, when his first book came out, Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist, everybody abandoned him. And so people just gently distance themselves. Some of my teachers, they still support me, they still answer my emails, but I just don't think they understand what I'm doing. And they think it's all a little nutty. So yeah, not much support. We're in no man's land. And then others actually go as far as consider us heretics for having such an open view. I was at Ajahn Chah's monastery in Ubon, Thailand. I spent about 10 days there, and the abbot, after I got to know the abbot a little bit, and he realized I had more secular views. I wasn't very open about it, but he could tell, and he said he was a German monk who ran the place, and he said, if I knew you were a secular Buddhist, I would have never opened the gate for you. And I was on great behavior. It wasn't anything I did. It was simply that that he saw me as a secular Buddhist. So yeah, we got some work to do to create some harmony in the Buddhist community for us. Garuda, please share.
Yeah, just really a couple of points. One was just what Tashi was saying regarding um, putting it out there as to what you believe. And I think that, as we said before, I think that's what the Dalai Lama, I think, in sort of very gently, is trying to do to open it more by giving that view rather than have a sort of strict um, direction. Basically, this is what you
Well,
believe.
he's in a tough position because his job is to preserve the tradition of Tibet, which
Exactly.
means all of that tradition Buddhism. So, and at the same time, he's very open minded, very scientific. So he's in a really tough
Yeah.
position.
And I think at the end of the day, I don't think we all have different viewpoints, which is great. But at the end of the day, we're all trying to get to the same point. And it's all about, to me, it's all about our intention. That's that's the whole base. To me, it's the whole basis of it. What is your intention as regards building? Are you doing it just for the sake of doing it? Or do you
And you
want
bring
to
up a great point from the article that we haven't touched on, the fact that the Buddha didn't like to go into long detail about these things. There's many stories of the Buddha being asked all these metaphysical questions, and the Buddha would just remain silent. They called it the Buddha's golden silence. What was there? 10 questions, 14 questions that the Buddha just refused to answer. And again, in the article, we talk about what the Buddha wanted is, yes, we need information, yes, we need knowledge, but enough knowledge to liberate ourselves. But when we get deeper into it, and especially when it becomes self-serving, in the Dharmapada, there was a line that I just am adored with, and it says that knowledge destroys our innate goodness. Now, clearly, they're not talking about all knowledge because the Dharmapada and the Buddhist teachings themselves are knowledge. But I'll interpret it as any kind of self-serving knowledge. The idea that I'm learning these things so I can be smarter than the rest of the Sangha, or that you're distracted from the actual practice of awakening, right? Gaining knowledge for knowledge's sake instead of for awakening's sake. And so this is what I like. This is what I want SBT to focus on. We have these conversations, people bring up a lot of interesting points, but in the back of my head, I'm always thinking, let's focus on awakening, the knowledge of awakening. Karma, yes, it's important to know what karma is for awakening. All this cosmology, is it really going to help us? Some of it might. And I'm not standing in judgment to say what you should learn and what you shouldn't. In fact, I believe that if you're passionate about it, go ahead. I'm not saying a word, but in my own mind, I keep thinking like the Buddha talked, that, focus on awakening, gain the knowledge you need for awakening. Then the idea is once you're awakened, you're supposed to gain the wisdom of the universe, if there is such a thing.
Yeah,
Thank you,
so
Guru.
that I totally agree. That, as I say, that our intention is to get to awakening. How we get there, whether we get there,
Thank you,
but
Garuda.
so that's our intention, and how we
Thank you.
whatever we believe,
Thank
fine.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Padma, Sangpo?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a clear thing. I mean, I'm an atheist. Before coming to secular Buddhism, I was very much an atheist. Very much science based. And how we look at things. I don't believe in hocus pocus. One of the things we have, in Scotland was the Protestant Reformation, and even sort of Western Europe, this whole idea of rationality and
That's
anyway,
right.
so I won't go much into it. And really, what this is doing by bringing secular Buddhism in is giving it a sort of rational, sort of scientific, sort of modern sort of take and understanding, while still being respectful to the origins. But
Stephen Batchelor
understanding
often talks about that. He
he
talks
does,
about
he
secular
does,
Buddhism being like the Reformation movement.
yeah, no, absolutely, and I get that myself. I remember reading that, but I felt that myself when I read that part. It's always been a belief that I had. Before I even read that, it just made sense to me. That you're rationalizing something. And okay, we're taking the best bits sometimes, but we. I don't believe in cultural appropriation. I'm not from Asia. You know what I mean? I'm from Scotland. No disrespect to those countries, but I'm not going to immerse myself in their culture totally, because that's not my culture. It'd be disrespectful, I feel. But I
That's one
think
of
that
the Dalai Lama's great quotes, right? He said it would be wrong for all of us to appropriate Tibetan Buddhism the way Tibetans practice it, making all the same mistakes that we did. And I was at a meeting with the Dalai Lama, and he encouraged us to create our own Buddhism.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you,
And that's what I
Sangpo.
like about that's what I like about Buddhism. Yeah, just what you just said there. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's absolutely lovely. Thank you so much. I told you it was a cool topic. Yeah, so I'm not going to get into it and all this. I just, I teach it, teaching it as traditional Buddhism. But further than that, I really don't have any opinions about all this stuff. There's not efficient evidence to make up any kind of decision about it all. With SBT, we focus on what's most illuminating, what's most fruitious. Is that a word? Fruitious? It is now. That's what we focus on. What's going to awaken us, and what's most potentially accurate. What is it? Something that the Buddha would have actually said, or is it some kind of later adaptation? That's the job. But with saying that, you realize that we'll just never really know. You have to be an agnostic to be a happy secular Buddhist, because we're not trying to find the ultimate answers to everything. There's always some indecision of what is and what isn't. So we just do the best we can. And the proof of it all is your life getting better? Are you awakening? And it seems like we're doing pretty good on that. I have some extraordinary students in this group. So we just keep chugging ahead. What else you got? Anybody? Oh, we covered meaning of life. I'm just trying to think if there was any other things that we talked about in the article. Oh, I think that's it. Hey, should we call it a teaching? I'd like to. David, please share. You need some help? There you go.
Sorry, yes, no, I'm not very good at that. I'm afraid it's just a final follow-up question. Surprise, surprise. But the purpose of life is to awaken. Where does that purpose come from?
Well, again, this is when the Buddha says the purpose of life or the consummation of life is to awaken, it's advice from the Buddha, right? It's not some fact out there. Again, each one of us can make up our own minds what our meaning and purpose is. The way it's worded, I could see that being a little confusing. But I think properly, the way I interpret it, is it's the Buddha recommending and prescribing awakening as the best thing to do with your life. But if you think about it, awakening, even in a minor awakening, just improving your life, by definition, it's moving towards a better existence, right? So I'll go along with his advice. That seems pretty good.
Seems a reasonable approach.
Well, yeah, and better than his cousin's advice of going to the casino and putting it all on red. Hey, anyways, hey, I wanted to also mention we had a lot of questions last time, and I thought, I can stay on after the recording if anybody wants to ask additional questions about this and test my knowledge. So, but why don't we stop the recording and then I'll be on for questions if anybody has any. With that said, let's end today's meditation with our altruistic affirmation. May all be healthy, may all be prosperous, may all be well, may all be present, free of past regret and future worry. May all abide in constant appreciation, which is the source of great joy and contentment. May all realize their true nature and the true nature of reality, which is awakening.